He arrived at my gate the way some men arrive everywhere, as if the ground had been waiting for the honor of his boots. I heard the motorcade before I saw it. 6 long cars, black as spilled ink, sliding over the cobblestones of the east forecourt with their engines throttled to a purr that was meant to be heard. The lead car did not slow at the striped barrier the way visitors' cars are required to slow. It nudged forward, testing, the chrome grille pressing toward the painted line, as though the line were a suggestion a clever man might talk his way past. Behind me, the flag over Harrogate Palace hung dead still in the gray morning, and I stood at my post beneath the arch of the sentry gate as I had stood 1,000 mornings, and I did not move. My name is Corporal Adric Vale of the Ravenmore Company of the King's Guard, and it was my duty that week to hold the inner sentry post at the mouth of the east forecourt, the last stone throat a visitor must pass through before the palace proper. I had held harder posts. I had stood a full watch in sleet that froze my chin strap to my jaw and never so much as blinked. But I remember that gray morning the way you remember the morning. A storm first shows itself on the horizon, small, distant, and already yours to weather. The rear door of the lead car opened before the car had fully stopped, which is a thing careful men do not do, and out stepped the man who had come to test me. He was tall, well-fed, wearing a dark suit cut close and a coat thrown over his shoulders like a cape, though the morning was not cold enough to need it. On his lapel he wore a badge, a heavy metal shield, gold and enamel, the crest of some agency I had never seen, from a delegation whose banner I did not know. Later I would learn he called himself an agent of the Federal Directorate, a name that meant a great deal in whatever country had sent him and nothing at all inside my gate. He had a broad, handsome, sun-lamp face, and the easy smile of a man who had never in his life been told no by anyone whose no could hold. He surveyed the forecourt, he surveyed the palace. And then he surveyed me, the red wool tunic, the tall black bearskin, the white gloves, the medals my father had earned before me and I had earned again, the rifle at my shoulder, and I watched the smile change. It did not fall. It sharpened, because I was not a man to him. I was a decoration, a painted soldier at the door of a toy kingdom, and he had come to see whether the paint would smear if he pressed his thumb to it. "You," he said, and pointed at me with 2 fingers held together like a small pistol. "You, come here, move this." He flicked the fingers at my post, at the barrier, at the whole discipline of the gate. "I have a schedule." I did not move, I did not speak. My eyes stayed forward, fixed on the middle distance the way they are trained to fix, and my breath stayed slow, and the storm on the horizon took its first real step toward me. He waited. He was not accustomed to waiting, and I watched the waiting work on him, watched it curdle the ease in his face into something harder. A junior man came scurrying from the second car, a thin, worried aide with a leather folder clutched to his chest, and said something low and urgent into his ear, and the agent waved him off without looking at him. Aides are for men who intend to listen. He had not come to listen. "I know you can hear me," he said, stepping closer, close enough that I could smell the cologne coming off him in waves, expensive and heavy. "I know you understand me. This is a courtesy, soldier. I'm giving you the courtesy of a warning. I am a federal agent of the Directorate on a state visit at the invitation of your king, and my time is worth more than your entire little parade. So you are going to step aside, open that gate, and let my cars through the short way. Now." The short way. There it was, the true shape of the thing. The short way through the sentry gate led across the inner ceremonial court, past the west colonnade where the late Queen Isolde's memorial stood, and out through the household arch, a path reserved for the king's own carriage and for no one else living. Every visiting delegation entered by the long way, around the outer wall, in at the grand vestibule where they were received with wine and ceremony, and where a schedule, if a man truly had one, was easily kept. The short way was not about time. The short way was about being the kind of man for whom the king's own road opens. I knew all this in the half-second his order hung in the air, And I said, because the standing order for my post permitted exactly one sentence and no more, in a voice pitched level and low. This gate does not open for you, sir. The grand vestibule receives all guests. I will summon an escort. It was the correct answer. It was the entire correct answer. And I watched it land on him like an insult flung across a ballroom, because to a man who has spent his life being the exception, being told he is a guest like any other is the one wound that does not heal on its own. The aide behind him went white. Somewhere up on the palace steps a door opened, and a figure in the black coat of the household staff paused, watching, and the agent of the directorate leaned in until the brim of his own shadow fell across my face, and he said, very softly, so that only I would hear it, "You have no idea who I am. By the time I'm done here, painted man, they'll be scrubbing your name off the duty roster." Then he stepped back, smiled his sharpened smile for the benefit of the aides and the drivers and the watching household man, and said loudly, "We'll do it the long way. For now." For now, I have thought about those two words many times since. They were a promise. He meant to come back for me, and he did, again and again over the days that followed, and each time he came back higher and harder, because a man like that does not learn from the first refusal. He only learns from the last one. Let me tell you how it ended, and then let me tell you how it got there, because the ending is the reason I am telling it at all. It ended with that same man, the agent of the directorate, standing in the grand vestibule of Harrogate Palace before the king himself and the whole assembled court, and it ended with him being handed a single sheet of paper that undid everything he had built his week upon, and it ended, this is the part I hold on to, with him looking, for the first time since his boots touched our cobblestones, like a man who had finally been told a no that would hold. He did not spit out his teeth. No one struck him. The king's guard does not win that way, and I would not have wanted to. He was humbled the way the proud are always most thoroughly humbled, quietly, completely, and by the exact rules he had spent the week trying to prove did not apply to him. But that was 5 days off, and between the gate that gray morning and the vestibule that final afternoon, there was a great deal of storm to weather. So let me take you back to the gate, and to the king who had not yet risen, and to the little discipline of standing still while a large man tells you that you are nothing. The motorcade reversed with a great deal of unnecessary revving and swung away toward the outer wall, and the forecourt went quiet, and the flag hung dead still, and I stood my post. My relief came at noon. His name was Guardsman Toller, a broad, slow, honest man 10 years my senior who had held these gates longer than I had been alive. And as he took up the position beside me for the handover, he said, without moving his lips, in the ventriloquist murmur we all learn, "Heard you had a visitor." "A guest of the king," I said. "A guest," Toller repeated, and there was a whole opinion folded into the one flat word. "The directorate lot, 12 of them in the rosewood wing, households been running since dawn." A pause. "Word is their man's already put in a complaint about the gate, about you." "Let him." "I," said Toller, "let him. Only Vale. Men like that don't complain to lose, they complain to build. First it's a note, then it's a word in the right ear. Then it's you standing in front of the captain explaining yourself." He shifted his rifle minute, correct. "Watch your feet, that's all. A man can hold a wall perfect and still get walked off it if he's not watching where the ground goes." Toller stood a while beside me before he took the post fully, in the companionable silence of two men who have shared the same cold, and then he said one more thing, half to himself. "You know what they never understand, the ones who come at us like that? They think the wall is the stone. They think if they can move the man, they've moved the gate. But the gate isn't the man and it isn't the arch. The gate is the word behind it. The king's word, our word. The whole long line of men who stood here and didn't sell the passage. You can't buy a word off a wall, and it drives them half to madness because everything else in their world has a price. He'll come back, Vale. He'll come back thinking he just hasn't found your price yet." He settled his rifle. You don't have one. That's the thing to hold on to. On the bad days when he's making it feel like you're the small man and he's the large one, you remember, you're the one thing in this whole forecourt he cannot purchase. That's not nothing. That's the whole of it. It was good counsel, and I have never forgotten it, though I did not yet understand how completely I would need it. I marched off, changed out of the ceremonial dress into working blues, and went to eat, and I thought the matter more or less closed. A rude man had been told the rules. The rules had held. This is the ordinary weather of a gate. I was wrong about that, but I was young, and youth mistakes the first refusal for the end of an argument. It is only the beginning. The palace I served is called Harrogate, and the king who held it was King Alaric, an old man by then, and an honorable one, though honor in an old king is sometimes a slow thing, more a memory of judgment than the sharp use of it. He had reigned a long time. He had buried his first wife, the Queen Isolde, whom the whole realm had loved and whose memorial stood in the inner court along the short way no visitor was permitted to take. And he had in his loneliness married again, the Queen Consort Morwenna, a proud cold woman of a proud cold house, who had brought with her a grown son, Lord Cassius, and a taste for arranging the palace to her own advantage that kept the household staff exhausted and the king's guard watchful. I tell you about Morwenna not because she is the villain of this particular story. She is not, though her hand touches it, but because the Queen Consort's court and the visiting directorate delegation were, from the first day, two currents flowing toward the same rocks. She saw in the agent a powerful man from a powerful place, and powerful men from powerful places were, to Morwenna, always potential allies against the parts of the palace that would not bend to her. And the king's guard, my company, the old Ravenmore line that had sworn its oath to the crown, and not to the woman who wore a crown by marriage, was chief among the things she could not bend. So when the agent's complaint about the gate reached the palace, it did not land, as Toller had feared, in the office of my captain. It landed first in the drawing room of the Queen Consort, and she read it, and she smiled, and she saw a use for it. But I am getting ahead of the storm. Let me stay at the gate a while longer, because the gate is where the shape of the man first showed itself, and it is at the gate that he came back the second time. The second day dawned clear and bright, a hard, clean winter light lying gold across the cobbles, and I was on the sentry post again from the 7th hour. The delegation's schedule that day took them from the Rosewood wing to the council hall by the proper route, and I watched them cross the outer forecourt in a loose, important cluster, the agent at their center in a fresh coat, talking, gesturing, the aides orbiting him. He did not look at my gate as he passed. That, I understood even then, was worse than if he had. A man who ignores you has stopped seeing you as an obstacle and started seeing you as a thing to be removed later, at leisure. Mid-morning, the council hall business done, the cluster came back across the forecourt, and this time the agent broke from it and came toward my gate alone, unhurried, his hands in the pockets of his coat, and I felt the storm take another step. He stopped a proper 3 paces off. He had learned that much, not to lean in where the household staff could see him lean. He was a quick study in the shape of a rebuke, if not in its meaning. "Corporal," he said. He had learned my rank overnight, which meant he had gone to some trouble. "Corporal Vale, I owe you an apology." I said nothing. My eyes stayed forward. "I was hasty yesterday," he went on in the warm, reasonable voice of a man laying a trap and enjoying the laying of it. "You were doing your job. I respect a man who does his job. Where I come from, we understand each other. We're the same, you and I, uniformed men. We keep the world running while the soft people sleep." He smiled. "So let me ask properly this time, as one professional to another. I have a private matter to attend to in the inner court, the Memorial Garden. I'm told it's very beautiful, the late Queen's garden. I'd like a moment there, alone, to pay my respects. Surely a man doing his duty can let another man pay his respects." It was cleverer than the order. It was much cleverer. He addressed his same demand, passage through the short way, into the inner court that was closed to him, in the clothes of reverence, so that a refusal would look like the small cruelty of a small official denying a mourner his moment. He had chosen the late Queen's memorial precisely because to guard it against a man claiming to grieve would look, to any watcher, like the guard was the one without a heart. And I will tell you honestly, for the length of one breath it worked on me. Not the request, I would never have granted the request, but the shame of refusing it. That is the thing about a man like that. He does not need to move you. He only needs to make you feel that standing still is itself a kind of sin. I let the breath go, and I said the one sentence my post allowed. The inner court is closed to all guests, sir. I will summon an escort to the grand vestibule. His face did the thing I had seen it do at the barrier, the smile sharpening, the warmth draining out beneath it like water out of cracked ice. But he held it this time. He nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he had suspected. You know, he said quietly, still 3 proper paces off, in my country we have a word for a man who cannot tell the difference between a rule and a wall. We call him furniture. He let that sit. Furniture doesn't decide who passes. Furniture just stands where it's put. And when the room is redecorated, he smiled, fully now, furniture is the first thing that goes. I want to set down here plainly what those words did inside me, because a man reading this might think a soldier hears furniture and lets it slide off him like rain off oilcloth. It does not slide. It goes in. The trick of the discipline is not that the words fail to land, they land, every one of them, and they find the soft places, because a man clever at cruelty is clever precisely at finding the soft places. Furniture. It landed on the exact fear a young guardsman carries and tells no one. The fear that the still man at the door is not, in fact, keeping anything, that the whole red and black ceremony of us is a costume worn over emptiness, that we are decoration pretending to be defense. He had found that fear in me in 2 mornings, without knowing my name until the day before, and he had pressed his thumb to it, and it hurt exactly as much as he wished it to. The discipline is not feeling. The discipline is feeling it fully, letting it go all the way in to the bottom where it can do its worst and standing anyway. A man who has not felt the wound cannot be brave about it. He is only numb, and numbness is not the guard's virtue. Ours is the harder one. We feel it and we hold. There were watchers too, and I have learned since that watchers matter more than the watched know. 2 grooms had stopped their work at the stable mouth to see the powerful visitor talk down to the sentry, and a household maid with a basket had frozen on the colonnade steps, and up on the 2nd floor a curtain had shifted where someone stood behind it. None of them said anything. None of them were meant to. But a gate is never held in private, however empty the forecourt looks. There is always someone at a window, always a groom pretending to see to a horse, and the story of what the sentry did travels down through the servants' halls faster and truer than any note a delegation writes. The agent thought he was performing for his aides. He was performing, without knowing it, for the whole underlife of the palace, the maids and grooms and boot boys and scullery men who are the realm's real memory, and every one of them who saw me stand went back to their work with the same small thought settling in them. He tried to move the Ravenmore man, and the Ravenmore man did not move. That thought is worth more to a kingdom than 100 banquets. I did not know it then. I only knew the maid on the steps caught my eye for half a second before she hurried on, and gave me the smallest nod, the way you nod to a man carrying something heavy up a stair, not pity but recognition. Steady on. We see you. I carried that nod through the rest of a hard day. Then he turned and walked back to his cluster, and I stood my post in the hard gold light, and I understood that Toller had been exactly right. The man was not complaining to lose. He was building, and I was the wall he had chosen to be seen tearing down. That evening I was summoned to the office of my captain, a lean gray man named Captain Marrow, whose whole face was a lesson in economy, and I stood at attention before his desk, while he read a paper by the light of a single lamp, and I felt the ground shift the way Toller had warned me it would. "There's a note," Marrow said, not looking up, "from the Directorate delegation, concerning the sentry gate, concerning you." He turned the page. "It says a corporal of the guard was obstructive, discourteous, and unhelpful to the point of insult toward a senior visiting official on the morning of his arrival, and again this morning. It says the official, a man of some standing in his own country, found the treatment beneath the dignity a state guest expects." He set the paper down and looked at me, and his gray eyes gave nothing away. "Tell me what happened." Every word. So I told him. The barrier, the order, the short way, the one sentence I was permitted, the return the second morning, the memorial garden, the word furniture. I told it flat and complete, as a guardsman tells a thing to his captain, adding nothing and hiding nothing, and Marrow listened without a flicker. And when I was done, he sat for a long moment with his hands folded. "You said the one sentence," he said, "both times." "Yes, sir." "You did not step aside." "No, sir." "You did not open the inner court to a foreign guest claiming to grieve at the late Queen's memorial." He said it slowly, weighing each part. "A memorial that guest had no business at, on a road that opens for the king and no one else." "No, sir. The inner court is closed to all guests. My standing order is absolute on that point." Marrow nodded once, and something eased very slightly in the corner of his mouth, the nearest thing to approval his face permitted. "It is," he said. "It is absolute, and you held it, and that is exactly what your post required of you. Understand me, Vale, I am not troubled by what you did. I am troubled by why a state guest is writing notes to build a case against a corporal on a gate." He tapped the paper. "This is not a complaint. A complaint asks for an apology and ends. This asks for nothing. It only records. A man records when he means to use the record later in front of people who will not have heard your side." He leaned back. "You have made an enemy, corporal, and not a stupid one. Watch your feet." The same words Toller had used. When two men who have held these walls for 30 years each tell you, unprompted, to watch your feet, a wise young man listens. I have tried ever since to be a wise young man. That night I was only a frightened one, lying awake in the barracks with the word furniture turning over and over in the dark, and I did not yet know that the storm I feared was only the first band of a much larger weather, and that before it broke it would pull in the Queen Consort, the Crown Prince, the King, and a truth about the agent of the Directorate that not even he had reckoned on being found out. The third day was the day the Queen Consort took a hand, and I did not see her hand at the time, because a hand like hers is felt long before it is seen. It began with a change to the duty roster. I came off the barracks that morning expecting the sentry gate and found instead that I had been reassigned, moved from the inner sentry post to the Rosewood wing, to stand at the door of the very corridor that housed the Directorate delegation. On its face it was nothing. Guardsmen are moved. But the sentry gate is a post of confidence, and the corridor of a guest wing is a post of service, and to move a man from the one to the other in the middle of a watch, with no reason entered in the book, is to say something without saying it. I read the reassignment the way you read a raised eyebrow. Someone wanted me nearer the agent and lower to him, and where he could see me every time he passed. I asked the duty sergeant mildly, who had ordered the change. He would not meet my eye. "Came down from above the company," he said. "Household request. Nothing for you to worry over. Above the company. There was only one household above my company that troubled itself with the placement of corporals, and it wore a consort's crown. So I stood the Rosewood corridor, and I did my service, and I watched the delegation come and go, and I watched the agent of the Directorate discover, with visible delight, that the painted man from his gate had been delivered to his door like a footman. He made the most of it. He passed me a dozen times that day, and each time he found some small new way to press his thumb to the paint. Fetch the steward furniture. Is the water cold, or must I send you for ice? Stand straighter, you're paid to be looked at. Each order was petty, and each was pitched to be overheard by his aides who laughed the laugh that paid men laugh, and each was calculated to draw exactly one of two responses from me: obedience, which would make me his servant, or refusal, which would give him a fresh grievance to record. He had built a little machine, and I was meant to feed it whichever way I moved. I fed it nothing. I stood the corridor. When his order fell within my duty, when he genuinely required the steward, or ice, or a direction to the council hall, I performed it correctly, wordlessly, as I would have performed it for any guest, and gave him no servility to enjoy. When his order fell outside my duty, when he told me to carry his coat, to hold his folder, to wait upon him as a valet waits, I did not move, and I did not speak, and I gave him no refusal to record. There is a narrow road between the servant and the rebel, and a guardsman learns to walk it or he does not last. I walked it all that long third day, and it cost me more than any sleet watch I ever stood, because sleet does not smile at you, and sleet does not want you to break. He was patient in his cruelty, which is the worst kind. A rough man tires, a clever one paces himself. He learned across that day which of his little jabs cost me the most, and he returned to those. He learned that I could take furniture all afternoon, but that the word footman said just so, with a glance at my medals, went in deeper, because it named the exact insult of my reassignment, that I had been carried down from a post of confidence to a post of service to be dangled before him. So he used footman. He learned that I did not so much as flicker when he mocked me, but that when he mocked the guard, when he said to an aide loud that he had heard our whole company was a museum piece, the king couldn't bring himself to retire. A wall of old men playing at soldiers, something moved behind my eyes one time before I stilled it. So he mocked the guard. He was a hunter of the soft place, and having found mine, he worked it with a craftsman's care, and I stood in that corridor and let him find nothing but the outside of a stone. Twice that day I felt the thing my father warned me of, the flood, the animal rising, the want to answer. Once when he snapped his fingers at me as at a dog, and told a passing lady gaily that the trick with these ceremonial soldiers was to treat them like the furniture they were, firm and without expectation, and she laughed. And the flood came up in me so hard and so fast that I felt my jaw set, and had to unset it by main force, breathing slow through my nose, eyes fixed on a scuff mark on the far wall until the room came level again. And once worse, near the end of the watch, when he leaned close under the pretense of straightening his cuff and said, for me alone, in a voice almost kind, "I'm going to enjoy watching them take that tunic off you. I've done it before, you know, to better men than you in better houses than this." There's a moment when a proud man finally understands he's been beaten, when the pride goes out of his face all at once. I collect that moment. I'm going to collect yours. The flood at that was not hot. It was cold, and it was worse than hot, because it was the want not to strike him but to unmake him, to say the true cruel clever thing back that would take the smile off his face and leave a mark. I had the sentence ready. I have never in my life so wanted to say a sentence. And I let it die in me unspoken and kept my eyes forward, because the whole of what I am is that I do not spend the king's silence on my own satisfaction. He wanted the ugly true thing from me. It was the last small victory left to him, to make me stoop to his level, to prove the wall had a rebel in it after all. I did not give it to him. The flood rose and I held, and the water broke against the inside of my skin and nowhere else, and he straightened his cuff and stepped back, and my face had told him nothing. And I saw. This is the reward, the only reward, and it is enough. I saw the smallest flicker of unease cross him, because a hunter who cannot find the soft place begins, at last, to wonder whether the thing in front of him has won. I want to tell you honestly what the cost of that is, because the stillness looks easy from the outside, and it is the hardest thing a man can do. When a large man stands close enough that you feel the heat of him and calls you furniture in front of laughing men, everything in the body says move. The oldest part of a man, the animal that kept his fathers alive, floods him with the want to answer, to step forward, to raise the hand, to say the plain true thing that would wipe the smile away. And you cannot. You must take the flood and let it rise in you and give it nowhere to go, and hold your eyes forward on the middle distance, and keep your breath slow when your breath wants to come fast, and let the whole storm of yourself break against the inside of your own skin where no one will ever see it. That is the discipline. It is not the absence of the flood. It is the flood, endured in perfect silence all day, for a man who has decided your endurance is a game. My father taught me it on this same gate when I was a boy watching him stand. I asked him once how he did it, how he stood while men mocked him, and he said a thing I did not understand until that third day. He said, "They think your silence is emptiness, Adric. It is not empty. It is the fullest thing there is. A man who can be provoked can be steered. A man who cannot is the only truly free man in the room, and they hate him for it because they can feel the freedom and they cannot touch it. Stand still, and you are the freest man in any room you enter, though you never say a word." I stood the rosewood corridor on the freedom my dead father had left me, and the agent of the directorate spent his whole day trying to touch a thing his kind can never touch. And by the evening he was angrier than I was tired, which is the only scoreline that matters in that particular contest. Toller found me at the change of the corridor watch, and he had seen enough of the day to read the rest of it in my face. "He's a bad one," Toller murmured, taking up the post, "but bad ones tire. They spend and spend to move you, and you don't move, and one day they've spent everything and they're the ones on the ground." He paused. "Only a bad one with a queen behind him doesn't tire the same way. He's got her purse to spend from now. Watch the queen's end of it more than his. His mockery's just weather. Her rearranging is the tide." He was right, of course. He was always right, old Toller. His mockery's just weather. Her rearranging is the tide. I have used that line to 100 younger men since, and I have never told one of them it wasn't mine. It was late in the afternoon that the Queen Consort's hand first showed itself openly. I was at the corridor door when the double doors at the far end opened, and Morwenna herself came through, in gray silk, with 2 ladies behind her and the agent of the directorate at her side. They had been in conference. I could see the leather folder open in his aide's arms behind them, and they were laughing together in the low, pleased way of 2 people who have discovered that they want the same thing. The Queen Consort did not, as a rule, walk the guest wings. That she walked this one, on the arm of this man, told me the 2 currents Toller had felt coming had met. She stopped when she reached my post. She looked at me the way she looked at all of the king's guard, the way you look at a piece of the furniture that has, unaccountably, refused to be moved to where you want it. And she said, to the agent, in a voice pitched perfectly for me to hear, "Is this the one?" "This is the one," said the agent pleasantly. "He does look very stiff," said the Queen Consort. "I've always thought so about these men, so much starch and so little sense. My husband keeps them out of sentiment. They belong to the old days." She tilted her head at me, studying me as one studies a stain. "You made our guest feel unwelcome, Corporal, at his own arrival, in my husband's house." I said nothing. To answer a consort's charge is not a corporal's place, and she knew it, and she used the silence to draw her conclusion in front of the agent she was courting. "You see," she said to him, "they don't even answer. They think their silence is dignity. I have always found it insolence." She smiled, and her smile and the agent's smile were in that moment the same smile on 2 faces. "Do not concern yourself with this one. He will not be at that gate much longer. I have spoken to the captain of the guard about a general review of the household posts. A great deal is going to be rearranged." Rearranged. The agent had said redecorated at the gate. Now the Queen Consort said rearranged. It was the same word wearing a crown, and I understood, standing at my post with my eyes forward and my face a wall, that the small storm at my gate had become something larger and colder. A proud foreign man and a proud native queen had found in me a shared small enemy, and in each other a useful friend, and between them they meant to have me off my post, and through me, to weaken the old guard that would not bow to either of them. I want to say a word about that moment, because it was the coldest of the whole week and the one that taught me the most. When the agent had called me furniture, it was a stranger's insult, and a stranger's insult, however clever, is only weather. But when the Queen Consort said the same thing, when she looked at 15 years of a company's faithful cold mornings and called it starch and old days and insolence, that was different because she was not a stranger. She was the crown, or a piece of it. She wore the same colors the king wore. And to be called furniture by the very house you have sworn your life to guard is a wound of another order entirely. It is the wound of loving a thing that does not love you back, of keeping faith with a house that would sell your faith for a foreign friend's good afternoon. I felt that wound as she passed. I will not pretend I did not. There is a particular loneliness in standing your post for a crown that despises you for standing it, and I stood in that loneliness while her gray silk hissed away down the corridor, and I found, this is what she never understood, what her kind never understand, that the loneliness did not weaken the oath. It clarified it. Because if I kept the gate only when the crown loved me for keeping it, I would be a hired man, and a hired man's wall opens for the next higher bidder. It was precisely in being unloved by Morwenna and standing anyway that I discovered the oath was not a bargain at all. It asked nothing back. It was the freest thing there is, and the loneliest, and I would not have traded the one for relief from the other. They swept on down the corridor. I stood the rest of my watch, and the corridor emptied, and the winter light went long and thin across the rosewood floor, and I turned her words over the way you turn a cold stone in your palm until it takes the warmth of your hand. So much starch and so little sense. They belonged to the old days. I thought of my father, who had belonged, by her reckoning, to older days still, and who had stood this same watch, and I thought that a woman who calls a thing old as an insult has forgotten that old is only what has been proven long enough to trust. A new wall is only a wall that has not yet been tested. An old one is a wall that has been tested 1,000 times and did not fall. I would rather be old in that sense than new. I would rather be starch and sense both, and let the house that could not tell the difference find out, at its cost, which of us was the furniture and which of us was the frame that held the house up. But the third day had one more thing to show me before it ended, and it was the thing that finally told me the man was not merely proud but dangerous, and it happened an hour after the Queen Consort left the corridor. The delegation held a small reception that evening in the Rosewood Salon, and I stood the salon door, and through it I could hear the agent hold court among the younger courtiers who had come to flatter the powerful visitor. He was telling them a story, his story, the story of the gate, but he was telling it turned inside out, so that in his version he was the reasonable man who had asked only for a moment at a beautiful garden and been refused by a cold little soldier drunk on his own small authority. The courtiers laughed. They laughed because he was powerful, and it is easy to laugh at furniture, and I stood the door and let it wash over me, because a guardsman does not defend himself to a room, and my father's freedom held. And then a girl's voice cut through the laughter, a clear young voice, unafraid, and the laughing stopped. I did not see who spoke from the door, but I knew the voice, because everyone in the palace knew it. It was the Princess Maylin, the Crown Prince's daughter, 9 years old and not yet taught to be careful, who had wandered down from the family wing where she was not supposed to be, and who had heard the tale of the agent's story, and who said, into the sudden quiet, with the terrible plain honesty of the young, "That's not true. That's the garden where my grandmother sleeps. Nobody's allowed there. The guard was being good. You wanted to go where you're not allowed and he wouldn't let you, and now you're telling it wrong so they'll laugh." I have never in my life so wanted to smile at my post, and I have never so completely not smiled. There was a silence you could have cut. And the agent of the directorate, this is the thing I want you to understand about him, the thing that turned my caution to real fear, did not laugh it off, did not bow to the child and make a graceful joke of it as any wise guest would have. He looked at a 9-year-old girl who had told the truth in front of the people he was courting, and for one instant before he mastered his face, I saw pure cold calculation cross it, the look of a man deciding whether a small honest thing was a threat to him, and how it might be handled. It lasted only a heartbeat. Then he smiled and said something smooth about the charming candor of children and steered the room back to easier ground. But I had seen it. And a steward's boy hurried the princess back to the family wing, and I stood the salon door with my heart going hard because I had learned the true measure of the man at last. A proud man wants to be obeyed. This man, faced with a wall he could not move, a corporal, a queen's caution, now even a child's plain truth, did not merely want to win. He was the kind who calculated, who hid things, who looked at an obstacle, however small, however innocent, and asked himself only how it might be removed. Toller had said his mockery was weather. I understood now it was not weather at all. It was the surface of something with a floor I had not yet seen, and I would not see the floor of it until the 5th morning in the gray light by a loose stone at the stable postern. I stood the salon door another hour after the princess was taken away, and I had time in that hour to understand what I had witnessed, and it frightened me more the longer I turned it over. A proud man and a dangerous man look alike from the outside. Both push, both bully, both cannot bear a no. But they are not the same beast. A proud man wants the room to admire him. His cruelty is a kind of hunger, and a hungry man, once fed, subsides. A dangerous man wants the room to fear him. His cruelty is a kind of arithmetic, and arithmetic does not subside. It only recalculates. I had spent 3 days thinking I faced the first kind, a vain official who wanted his shortcut and his admiration, and I had built my discipline for that, the patience to outlast a hunger. But the look I had seen cross his face when a child told the truth was not hunger. It was the cold, flat measuring of a man deciding whether a 9-year-old was a problem, and how a problem is removed. That is not vanity. That is the face of a man with something to protect, and men protect most fiercely the things they should never have done. I did not yet know what he was protecting. But I knew, standing that salon door with the flatterer's laughter starting up again behind me, that I had underestimated him in exactly the way he wanted to be underestimated. That the mockery, the furniture, the whole week's parade of petty cruelties had been in part a costume, a loud, bright distraction worn over something quiet and rotten, and that a man who wears his arrogance so openly is very often hiding a worse thing behind it. Using the small ugliness you can see to keep you from looking for the large one you cannot, I resolved that hour to keep looking. I did not know what for. But I had learned, from my father and from Toller and from 3 hard days, that when a man works this hard to make you watch his hands, the thing worth watching is his feet, where he goes, and when, and what he does when he thinks no one is standing in the dark. That night, for the 2nd time in 3 days, I was summoned, but not to my captain's office. I was summoned to the Crown Prince. Crown Prince Rowan was the king's son by the late Queen Isolde, and he was, in the way the realm reckoned such things, everything his stepmother was not, warm where she was cold, plain-spoken where she was arch, and most inconveniently for Morwenna, deeply beloved by the very guard she despised, because he treated us as men who had chosen a hard, honorable life rather than as furniture inherited with the walls. He was not yet king. But he was the shape of the king the realm was waiting for, and everyone in the palace knew it, and no one knew it more keenly than the Queen Consort, who saw in Rowan the one wall in Harrogate she could never rearrange. His man found me at the barracks after the evening meal and led me not to a grand chamber, but to a small plain study off the eastern gallery, book-lined and warm, where the Crown Prince sat at a writing table with his coat off, and his sleeves turned back, looking, for all the world, like an ordinary tired man at the end of an ordinary long day. He waved me out of my salute before I had finished it. "Corporal Vale," he said, "Ravenmore Company. Your father held the sentry gate before you, I think." "He did, your highness." "Good men the Ravenmores, sit. No, I know you'd rather stand. Stand, then. A faint smile. "I'll not keep you long. I want to hear from you and not from a note what happened at my mother's gate." My mother's gate. He meant the late Queen Isolde's, the inner court, the memorial garden, the short way. He called it hers. I understood then that Rowan already knew a great deal about what had passed, and that the memorial garden was not to him a piece of ceremonial geography but the resting honor of the mother he had lost, and that a foreign man's attempt to walk it as a stage for his own importance had reached the crown prince as something closer to a wound. So I told him, as I had told my captain, flat, complete, hiding nothing. The barrier, the order, the short way, the memorial, the word furniture. And when I came to the third day, to the corridor and the reassignment and the Queen Consort on the agent's arm, I told him that too, because he had asked for every word, and a guardsman does not choose which words his prince may have. Rowan listened without interrupting, his chin on his folded hands, and when I finished he was quiet for a while, and then he said something I have never forgotten. "Do you know why my father keeps the king's guard, corporal, when half his court tells him you're an expensive old habit?" He did not wait for me to answer. "Because a crown is only as good as the thing it cannot make you do. Any man can build a wall of soldiers who obey. The rare and precious thing, the thing worth all your starch and all your cold mornings, is a wall of soldiers who will refuse, who will hold a rule against the king himself, if the rule is right, because they swore to the crown and not to the head that wears it." He looked at me steadily. "You held my mother's court against a man who wanted to use her grave as a doorway. You did it with one sentence twice, and you did not bend, and you did not break, and you gave him nothing to hang you with. That is not furniture, corporal. That is the whole reason we are still worth calling a kingdom." He stood and put out his hand, an astonishing thing, a prince offering his hand to a corporal, and I took it. "Watch your feet," he said, the third man to say it. "The tide coming for you is bigger than you know, but you are not standing on that wall alone. Remember that when it seems otherwise. You will need to remember it." I left his study walking taller than I had walked in 3 days, and I stopped on the eastern gallery in the dark and stood a while by the tall windows that looked down on the inner court, and I looked at the memorial in the moonlight, the pale stone, the low iron rail, the garden the late queen had loved and that her husband had closed to the world in his grief, and I understood better than I had before why I had held the gate the way I held it. It was not the standing order alone. Orders are ink. It was that a good woman was at rest on the other side of my post, on ground her husband had asked the world to leave in peace, and a vain man had wanted to walk it as a stage. Some walls you hold because you are told to. This one I would have held whether I had been told to or not, and I think Rowan knew that, and I think it was why he had called it his mother's gate to a corporal he had never met, because he had needed to know whether the man on it understood what he was standing over or only what he was standing under. I understood. I stood there a long time in the cold gallery, and then I went to my bed, and for one night I let myself believe the worst was behind me. The Crown Prince knew. The Crown Prince approved. Surely I thought that settled it. It did not settle it. It only meant that, when the storm broke, it would break across a much larger field than one corporal's gate, because the agent of the directorate had not, in fact, come to Harrogate to bully a sentry. The sentry was a game he played to pass the time. He had come for something else entirely, and it was the fourth day that showed me what. The state visit had a purpose beyond ceremony. Such visits always do. The directorate delegation had come to conclude an accord, a treaty of cooperation between their country and ours, the details of which were far above a corporal's station, but the shape of which was known to every servant in the palace, because a treaty means banquets, and banquets mean a month of household labor. The accord was to be signed at the week's end, in the grand vestibule, before the king and the assembled court, and the agent of the directorate. I learned this from Toller, who learned it from a footman, who learned it from a clerk, was not the head of the delegation at all. The head of the delegation was an old, careful, courteous envoy named Sir Haveth, a man of genuine rank who kept mostly to the Rosewood Wing's finest rooms and spoke softly and troubled no one. The agent was Haveth's security chief, his shield of office, the man who went ahead into every room and decided who might enter it. And that, I came to understand on the fourth day, was the whole of him. He was a man whose entire importance flowed from a single power, the power to say who passes. In his own country that power was real and large. He decided which doors opened before the envoy and which stayed shut. He cleared the rooms. He set the perimeter. His word at a threshold was law, and a career of thresholds had taught him that the man who controls the door controls everything that happens beyond it. Which is why he could not let my gate go. Do you see it now? A man like that cannot pass a door he does not command. It is not vanity, though it looks like vanity. It is the deep terror of the man whose whole self is his authority. If there exists one threshold in the world where his word does not open the way, then his word is not law, it is merely loud, and the ground he has stood on his whole life turns to water. My gate was that threshold. My one sentence twice had told him that here, in this house, his shield meant nothing and his word opened nothing, and he could not walk away from that. He had to break it, or he had to admit that he was, after all, just a man at a door like any other, and that admission would have unmade him. So on the fourth day, he stopped playing at furniture and reached for something larger, and this is where the storm truly broke. I was back on the sentry gate that morning. The Queen Consort's rearrangement of the roster had, it seemed, been quietly undone by someone above her, and I have always believed I know whose hand undid it. And mid-morning the agent came across the forecourt again, but this time he did not come alone and he did not come to talk to me. He came with two of his own men, hard-faced and armed under their dark coats, and he came with a paper, and he came with Sir Haveth's authority draped over his shoulders like a borrowed coat. He stopped at my barrier. "Corporal Vale," he said, and his voice was different now, no longer the mockery of the corridor, but the flat official register of a man reading you your fate. "By the authority of the delegation of the Directorate, and under the terms of the security accord being concluded between our states, I am exercising the right of the visiting security detail to inspect and clear the ceremonial route the accord will travel." He held up the paper. "The signing procession will pass from the Rosewood Wing to the Grand Vestibule. The most direct and secure route," he smiled, and I knew the smile and I knew the word before he said it, "is the inner court, through this gate. I require it opened now, so my men may sweep it ahead of the ceremony. This is not a request, Corporal. This is a security requirement of a state accord. Refuse it and you obstruct a treaty between two crowns." It was, I will grant him, a beautiful trap. He had turned his petty week-long one into a matter of state. He had found a paper, a real paper, with Sir Haveth's seal on it, granting the security detail the right to clear the ceremonial route, and he had simply decided on his own authority that the ceremonial route ran through the one gate he had failed to open by insult. If I refused now, I would not be a stiff corporal denying a rude man his shortcut. I would be the soldier who blocked a treaty, obstructed a state accord, insulted a visiting crown, and did it. This was the masterstroke over the resting honor of the late Queen, which a cynical man could paint as one guard's sentimental stubbornness set against the peace of two nations. And the Queen Consort, I do not doubt, had helped him find the paper. It was too neat to be his alone. I looked at the paper. I looked at his two hard men. I looked at the inner court behind me, where the late Queen Isolde's memorial stood in the winter light, on the road that opened for the king and no one else living. And I felt every one of the three warnings, tollers, marrows, rowans, settle onto me at once. Watch your feet. Here was the ground going out from under them. If I opened the gate, I broke a standing order absolute since before I was born, and let a foreign man walk the king's own road across the late Queen's grave to serve his own vanity dressed as statecraft. If I refused, I gave him, and the consort behind him, the exact grievance they had spent 4 days building, the guard that obstructs the crown. There was, of course, a third road, and he was counting on my not being able to see it or not daring to take it. The reasonable middle. Open the gate just this once, under protest, for the good of the treaty, and be the sensible man who bent a little for peace. Half the court would have called it wisdom. Marrow's own note in the book might have gone easier on the corporal who compromised than on the corporal who dug in. And it would have been the end of me all the same, and the end of something larger than me, because a wall that opens just this once. For a paper is not a wall, it is a door with a story it tells itself, and the agent of the directorate had built his whole life on finding exactly that story in exactly that kind of man. I did not take the third road. I took the only road my oath left me. I did not shout. I did not lay a hand on my rifle beyond the parade carry it already held. I said, in the level low voice of my post, but this time I said more than my one sentence, because the situation had passed beyond the one sentence and into the place where a guardsman must speak plainly or fail. Sir, the ceremonial route of any signing passes by the outer colonnade to the grand vestibule, as it has for every accord in the reign of the king. It does not pass through the inner court, and it never has, and no paper of the delegation can move the king's own road, because the king's road is the king's to move and no other man's. This gate does not open for you. If the route of the procession is in question, it is a question for the king's chamberlain and the captain of the guard, and I will summon them both now before you and your witnesses and let them answer it. But I will not open this gate on your word or on that paper, and if you attempt to pass it, I will hold it, not against your treaty, sir, which is not mine to touch, but against you, which is exactly what I am posted here to do. I had never, in 5 days, said so many words to him at once, and I felt the change in the forecourt the moment I finished, the way you feel the wind shift before a storm turns. All week I had answered his provocations with a single sentence or with silence, and he had read that economy as weakness, as the limited vocabulary of a limited man. Now I had spoken plainly at length, and every word had been a rule and not a plea, not I would rather you did not, but this gate does not open for you. And the difference between those two registers is the whole difference between a man who hopes and a man who holds. He had come expecting to argue with a servant. He found himself instead standing before the plain statement of a law, delivered by a man who plainly did not care whether the law inconvenienced him, and there is nothing a bully can do with a law. A bully needs a person to lean on. A law has no face to press a thumb against. He had spent 5 days trying to make me into a person he could break, and in that one long answer I had become, in front of all his witnesses, the thing he could not break, not a Drick Vale who might be frightened, but the king's gate, which does not open and cannot be flattered or threatened or bought, because it is not a man at all. It is a word made of stone. The forecourt had gone very quiet. His 2 hard men had gone still, and I saw in the agent's face the first flicker of a thing I had not seen there before, not anger. He had shown me plenty of anger, but the cold, small doubt of a man who has pushed against a wall expecting it to be a curtain and felt, instead, stone. Summon them, then, he said softly, because he could not now refuse without looking like a man afraid of the very officials he had claimed to serve. Summon your chamberlain, summon your captain. Let them explain to Sir Haveth why the king's guard obstructs the accord their king invited us here to sign. He smiled, and the smile had teeth in it. You have made a very large mistake, corporal. You could have opened a gate. Instead, you've opened a matter of state. When the chamberlain overrules you, and he will, because no chamberlain lets one stubborn soldier scuttle a treaty, you will not merely be moved off your post. You will be the guard who nearly broke the peace. There will be no roster for you to be scrubbed off of. Do you understand what you've done? I understood exactly what I had done. I had refused in the open before witnesses, and I had put my refusal into the hands of the king's own officers to judge, which meant that if I was wrong, I would fall completely, and if I was right, it would be the king's law and not my stubbornness that stood, and either way the matter had been lifted out of the shadows where he and the consort had been building it, and set down in the full cold light of the crown's own justice. By now the forecourt had filled with witnesses, and I was glad of every one of them, because a thing done in the open is a thing that cannot afterward be lied about. The commotion had drawn them the way a commotion always does. Grooms from the stables, 2 footmen who had been carrying linen and forgot they were carrying it, a knot of the delegation's own junior men clustered uncertainly by the second car, the worried aide with the leather folder white to the lips, and along the colonnade, a growing line of the household staff who had learned, in the servant's way, that something was happening at the sentry gate that they would want to have seen with their own eyes. I marked them all without moving my head. I have told you a gate is never held in private. This one, now, was held before half the working palace, and I understood that the agent had made his gravest error not in threatening me, but in doing it loudly, in daylight, in front of the very people whose quiet memory outlasts every official's note. He thought the crowd was his audience. He did not yet understand it was his jury. The waiting itself was a kind of ordeal, and he meant it to be. He did not fill the hour with more threats. He had learned that threats slid off me, but with silence of his own, a smiling, patient silence, standing a little apart with his 2 hard men, letting the minutes work on me the way he imagined minutes worked on a frightened man. And I will not pretend the minutes did not work. Every one of them carried the same cold question. What if he is right? What if the Chamberlain does overrule me, and I am left as the corporal who broke the peace, and the whole edifice of my certainty about the King's Road turns out to be an old habit after all, a thing I believed because my father believed it, undone in an afternoon by a paper with a real seal? A man standing his ground in the open must carry, the whole while, the private possibility that his ground is wrong. That is the true weight of it, heavier than any rifle. I carried it that hour. I fixed my eyes on the middle distance, and I let the doubt rise in me exactly as I had let the flood rise in the corridor, all the way to the top, and I did not let it move my feet. If I was wrong, I would find out from the King's own officers in the King's own light, and I would take the fall standing, and that was better. This is the thing my father left me, and I clung to it that hour. That was better than being right in the dark by bending in the dark. The gate holds until the King's hand in the book says otherwise. That was not my opinion. That was my post, and a man is never so free as when he has stopped defending his opinion and simply stands his post. That was the false dawn and its false dusk both. For 1 long hour, as we waited on the forecourt for the Chamberlain and the captain to come, I did not know which it would be, vindication or ruin. And when they came, it got worse before it got better. The captain of the guard came first, my own Captain Marrow, gray and lean and unhurried, crossing the forecourt with 2 guardsmen at his back and reading the whole scene in a single sweep of his eyes. The barrier, the agent, the 2 hard men, the paper, and me at my post. He said nothing to me. He took his place a little to the side, where a captain stands to witness and not to decide, because the question of a procession's route was not his to rule but the Chamberlain's, and Marrow knew the exact edges of his authority the way I knew the edges of mine. The Chamberlain came second, and my heart went down when I saw who it was. The King's Chamberlain that season was Lord Cassius, the Queen Consort's grown son. I have told you Morwenna married into the crown and brought her son with her. What I had not yet told you is that, in the slow softening of the old king's grip, she had contrived to have that son given the Chamberlain's white staff, the office that governed the ceremonies and the roots and the order of the household. So the man come to rule on whether the agent's paper could move the King's Road was the Queen Consort's own son, and the Queen Consort had spent 4 days making common cause with the agent, and I understood, watching Cassius cross the forecourt with his mother's cold, handsome face and his mother's cold, handsome manner, that the trap had 1 more jaw than I had counted. Cassius took the paper from the agent. He read it slowly, and the longer he read it the more I saw the small, pleased curl come into the corner of his mouth, and I knew what he was going to say before he said it, because it was what his mother would have wished him to say. "The paper is in order," Cassius announced, loud enough for the whole forecourt. "The security detail of a visiting delegation holds under the accord the right to clear the ceremonial route, and as Chamberlain the ceremonial route is mine to set." He looked at me, and there was a whole family's contempt in the look. "I set it through the inner court. It is the most direct and the most fitting, and I will hear no more of old habits from a corporal on a gate. Open it." There it was. The Chamberlain, the king's own officer for such matters, whatever the blood behind him, had ruled against me in the open, before the agent, before the captain, before the 2 hard men, before the handful of household staff who had gathered at the edges. The agent turned to me with the full, slow triumph of a man who has finally, after 4 days, arranged the world back into the shape where his word opens every door. "Open it, corporal," he said gently. "You heard the Chamberlain, it's over." And I did not open it. I will tell you what it costs to stand against your own Chamberlain's direct order on an open forecourt, with your captain 3 paces off saying nothing, and a foreign man smiling, and the ground you were warned to watch now visibly gone from under your feet. It costs everything you have, and then it asks for a little more, and you find the little more in the only place a guardsman ever finds it, which is the oath itself, said plainly to yourself in the cold, one more time. "My Lord Chamberlain," I said, and my voice did not shake, which surprised me then and pleases me still, "the ceremonial route is yours to set. But the inner court is not a ceremonial route. It is the king's private road, closed to all guests by a standing order that predates your office and mine, an order that only the king himself may lift in his own hand in the book of the household. If the king has lifted it, show me his hand in the book, and I will open this gate to him this instant. But no chamberlain may open the king's private road by his own word, because the road is not the household's to give, it is the king's. And I am posted here by the king's own order and not by yours. Show me the king's hand, my lord, or send for the king. Until one or the other this gate holds." The forecourt went so still, I could hear the flag rope tapping the pole. Cassius went white, then red. He had not expected it, no one had expected it, and he was not, whatever else he was, a stupid man, and in the silence I watched him do the arithmetic. He could order me arrested. But to arrest a guardsman for demanding to see the king's own hand before opening the king's own road was to make a scene that would go straight to the king. And the king, old and slow as he was, had never once lifted the closure on his late wife's memorial road, and everyone in the palace knew it. And if the king were asked, he would say so, and then it would be the chamberlain and the consort and the foreign agent standing exposed as the party that had tried to force the king's private grief open for a shortcut. Cassius had ruled fast in front of his mother's chosen friend, and now I had done the one thing he could not have prepared for. I had appealed in the open, not against his authority but above it, to the king himself, in a matter where I knew, where we all knew, the king would take my side. "Send for the king," said a new voice, quiet and certain, from the arch of the east colonnade. Crown Prince Rowan had come. I do not know how long he had been standing there, long enough, I think, to have heard it all. He came across the forecourt without hurry, in a plain, dark coat, and the whole gathering turned to him and bowed, the agent a beat too slow and too shallow, and Rowan stopped at the barrier beside me, on the corporal's side of the line, and looked at the agent of the directorate with a calm that was worse for the man than any anger could have been. "My father is at his rest and will not be disturbed for a question that already has an answer," Rowan said. "I am the crown prince, and I will answer it in his place, and my father will confirm every word of it tonight, which I invite the chamberlain to arrange." He turned to Cassius. "The inner court has been closed since my mother was laid to rest there. My father closed it in his own hand in the book, and has never once opened it, and you know this, my lord, because I have seen you turn processions around it a dozen times in your own office. To open it now, for a foreign detail, over a paper about a route that has never once run through it, would not honor the accord. It would insult it, and it would insult my mother and my father and every man of this guard who has kept faith with a closed gate for 15 years while lesser men called it an old habit. He looked at last at the agent and his voice did not rise. Corporal Vale is correct. The gate holds. Your route runs by the colonnade, as every route has, and if that is not direct enough for your comfort, sir, then I can only observe that you have come a very long way to be inconvenienced by a wall. And I would ask myself, were I you, why one wall in a foreign house has cost you 4 days of your visit and a great deal of your dignity, when the treaty you were sent to guard has been sitting the whole while, unguarded on the table. It was the first time I saw the agent of the directorate genuinely afraid, not of consequence, but of being seen. Because Rowan had said, out loud, in front of Sir Haveth's own witnesses, the thing the agent had spent 4 days hiding even from himself, that the wall had become his whole visit, that the security chief sent to guard an envoy had spent the week obsessed with humbling a corporal on a gate, and that a careful old envoy like Haveth, when he heard of it, might reasonably wonder whether his security chief could be trusted to guard anything at all. The agent recovered. Men like that always recover once, twice before the end. He drew himself up and said, coldly, we will see what Sir Haveth makes of a kingdom that hides behind a boy prince and a corporal to obstruct an accord its own king invited. We will see what your king makes of it at the signing. This is not finished. No, Rowan agreed. It is not. It finishes at the signing. I would be careful, sir, what you choose to bring into that room. And he turned and walked back toward the palace, and the agent stared after him, and Cassius folded his paper very small, and Captain Marrow, 3 paces off, said nothing at all. But as he turned to go, he caught my eye for the briefest instant and inclined his head, 1/4 of an inch, which from Marrow was the same as another man throwing his cap in the air. The gate had held, but the agent was right about one thing. It was not finished. It finished at the signing, and what finished it was not the crown prince, and not the captain, and not even the king. It was a single sheet of paper, and I was the one who put it into the right hands, and I had no idea on the 4th night that I was about to. The 5th day was the day of the signing, and it began before dawn with a small strange thing that I almost did not notice, and that turned out to be the whole ending in miniature. I was on the sentry gate again from the 5th hour. Marrow had put me back there deliberately, I think. A captain's quiet way of saying the gate is yours and no one takes it from you. And in the last dark before the light, when the forecourt was empty and the palace slept, I saw the agent of the directorate come out of the rosewood wing alone. He did not see me. A sentry in the dark under the arch is very hard to see if he does not wish to be seen, and I did not wish to be. He came across the forecourt with something in his hands, a leather folder, the same one his aide had carried all week, and he went not toward the grand vestibule but toward the outer wall, toward the small postern by the stables where the night refuse was taken out, and he did a thing there in the gray dark that I did not understand until later. He knelt, and he prized up a loose flagstone I knew well because I had reported it loose myself a month before, and he slid something beneath it, and he set the stone back, and he stood and dusted his knees and walked back inside as though he had done nothing at all. I marked the stone, I marked the hour, and I said nothing to anyone, because a corporal who accuses a state guest of hiding things under stones on the morning of a treaty had better be very sure of what is under the stone. So when my relief came at the change of watch, I did not go to my meal. I went quietly to the loose flagstone, and I lifted it and I looked. Beneath it was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, and inside the oilcloth were papers, and I did not need to read very far to understand what I was holding, because the first sheet had at its head the seal of the directorate's own treasury and the name of a house, a merchant house of some third country, a house I had never heard of, and below it a schedule of sums, large sums, paid into an account in the agent's own name, in exchange for terms. Terms hidden inside the accord. The security chief who cleared every door had also, it emerged, been paid to clear a door in the treaty itself. A quiet clause a concession buried in the accord's long, dull middle, that would have handed that third house a right over our realm's river trade that no honest envoy would have signed, and that Sir Haveth, the careful old man, plainly did not know was there. The agent had not come to guard the accord. He had come to poison it for a merchant house's coin, and he had hidden the proof under a loose stone by the stables to be collected after the signing when the ink was dry and the harm was done. And I understood all at once the whole of him, the obsession with my gate, the terror of a door he could not open. It was not only pride. It was a guilty man's need to command every threshold, because a man carrying a secret cannot bear a wall he does not control. A wall he does not control is a wall that might, one gray morning, watch him kneel in the dark and lift a loose stone. He had tried for 4 days to break me off, my gate, not merely to salve his vanity, but because his instinct, the true animal instinct of the corrupt, had told him that the one incorruptible thing in that forecourt was the one thing most likely to be standing there in the dark on the 5th morning, watching, when he came to hide his sin. I wrapped the papers back in the oilcloth. I did not take them to the Chamberlain, whose blood I did not trust. I did not take them to Sir Haveth, whom I did not know. I took them to the only man in the palace who had stood on the corporal's side of the line, and I put them in his hands, and I told him where I had found them and whom I had seen hide them, flat and complete, hiding nothing. Crown Prince Rowan read the first sheet, and the second, and his face, which I had only ever seen warm or tired, went to something cold and still that I had not known it could hold. He looked up at me. "You are certain it was he? You saw him, not an aide, him?" "I saw him, your highness, in the gray light. He prized up a stone I had reported loose a month before, so I knew exactly where to look. It was him." Rowan was quiet a long moment. Then he did a thing that told me, more than any word, the measure of the man he would be as king. He did not summon the guard to arrest the agent in his rooms, which would have been the loud way, the way that made a scene and a scandal, and gave a cornered man the chance to burn what he could and deny the rest. He set the papers down, and he thought, and he arranged the ending the way a king arranges an ending, so that the truth would come out in the one room, at the one hour, before the one audience, where it could not be walked back, and where the man who had spent 5 days insisting that the rules did not apply to him would be undone by the rules in front of everyone whose good opinion he had come so far to win. "Say nothing," Rowan told me, "to anyone. Be at your gate for the procession in full dress exactly as ordered. And corporal, bring these to the vestibule yourself on my authority and give them to no hand but mine. When I raise my left glove, come forward, not before. Do you understand?" I understood. I went back to my gate, and I stood the last watch of the longest week of my life, in full dress in the winter light, holding under my tunic a bundle of oilcloth that was about to end a man, and waiting for a crown prince to raise his left glove. The signing was set for the 3rd hour of the afternoon in the grand vestibule, and it was, as such things are, a spectacle. The great room had been dressed in the colors of both crowns. The court assembled along the walls in their orders and ribbons. The king, Alaric, sat on his chair of state at the head of the room, old, upright, his hands a little unsteady on the arms of the chair, but his eyes clear, and beside him, one step down and to the right, sat the crown prince. The Queen Consort Morwenna sat on the king's other side in gray and silver, and her son the Chamberlain stood near her with his white staff, and I saw the mother and the son exchange a small satisfied glance as the delegation entered, and I understood that they believed this was their hour, that the accord they had helped along would be signed, the foreign friend they had courted would be pleased, and the troublesome corporal would be, at last, someone else's problem. The delegation came in by the colonnade, by the proper long route, the route I had held them to all week. Sir Haveth walked at their head, small and stooped and courteous, and behind him came the agent of the directorate in his finest coat, his gold shield gleaming, his sunlamp face composed into the smooth mask of a man at the summit of his work. He did not look at me where I stood at the vestibule's inner door in full dress. I had ceased to be worth his attention. He believed he had won. The accord lay on a long table at the center of the room, 2 fair copies, a pen of state beside each. The king's chancellor read the preamble aloud: the friendship of the 2 crowns, the cooperation of the 2 peoples, the usual grand slow words, and Sir Haveth stepped forward to sign first on behalf of his crown, and dipped the pen, and it was at that exact moment, with the pen wet and the whole room hushed, and the agent smiling his summit smile, that the Crown Prince Rowan rose from his chair and said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the vestibule, "Before the seal is set, a word in the king's presence for the honor of both crowns." Sir Haveth straightened, the pen still in his hand. The room turned. The king looked at his son with an old man's slow attention, and Rowan raised his left glove. I came forward. I will not pretend I was not afraid. To walk the length of the grand vestibule in full dress, past the whole court, past the Queen Consort's whitening face and the Chamberlain's staff, and the agent's smile going brittle at the edges. It is a walk I still take, sometimes in dreams. But I had walked harder ground that week, and I had my orders, and I put the oilcloth bundle into the Crown Prince's hand and no other, and I stepped back to my place, and I let the ending become the king's. Rowan unwrapped the bundle before the court. He held up the first sheet. "Sir Haveth," he said, "you have come to us in good faith, and you sign in good faith, and so I would be a poor host to let you set your crown seal to an accord you have not fully read. This was found this morning, hidden under a stone by the stable postern, wrapped against the weather, put there before dawn by a man's own hands." He turned to the agent. "Your hands, sir. You were seen." The agent's smile was entirely gone now. "This is a slander," he began, "a corporal's invention, a palace that would not open a gate now invents." "It is the treasury seal of your own directorate," Rowan said over him, evenly, holding the sheet so Haveth could see it, "on a schedule of payments into an account in your name, from a merchant house of a third country, in exchange for a clause. A clause buried in the long middle of this very accord here, the one on the table, the one Sir Haveth was about to sign, granting that house a standing right over our river trade that no honest envoy would concede, and that, I will wager, Sir Haveth has never read because Sir Haveth did not write it. You wrote it, sir. You were paid to write it. And you spent 5 days trying to break the one guard who stood between you and the door where you meant to hide your proof, because a guilty man cannot bear a wall he does not command." The silence in the grand vestibule was the silence of 100 people all understanding a thing at once. Sir Haveth took the sheet from Rowan's hand with fingers that trembled and read it, and I watched the careful old envoy's face pass from confusion to comprehension, to a cold, quiet fury far more terrible than any shout, because it was aimed at his own man, at the shield he had trusted at his own back, and there is no anger deeper than that. He read the clause in the accord that Rowan pointed him to, the buried thing, in the long dull middle where no one reads, and he set both sheets down on the table, side by side, the payment and the poison, and he looked up not at the king, but at his own security chief. "Take off the shield," Sir Haveth said very quietly. The agent did not move. "Take it off," the old man said again, and now his voice did carry, "or I will have it taken. You came into a foreign house under my name, and you sold my crown's honor for a river you do not own, and you spent 5 days making an enemy of the only honest man at the gate because you knew he was the one who would catch you. Take off the shield. You are relieved. You will be held by my own detail on my own authority, and you will answer for this at home where the answering will not be gentle." He turned at last to the king and bowed low. "Majesty, I am shamed before you. But I am also, this hour, in your debt, and in the debt of your guard, who kept a gate that I did not know needed keeping. On behalf of my crown I withdraw this accord as it stands, and I will sign gladly tomorrow the honest thing it was always meant to be, with that clause struck out and its author in chains. And I will ask you, if you will grant it, to let me shake the hand of the corporal who found the stone. I have stood a great many watches in my life. I have never before or since been as unable to hold my composure as I was in the moment the king of my realm rose from his chair of state, the old slow honorable man, to his feet, unsteady, gripping the arm of the throne, and the whole court rose with him because the king was standing, and he looked down the length of his own grand vestibule at a corporal of the Ravenmore company, and he inclined his head to me. And the agent of the directorate, being led from the room by Haveth's own men with his gold shield taken from his coat, passed within 3 paces of me on his way out, the same 3 proper paces he had once kept at my gate, and he looked at me at last, and there was no threat left in the look, and no mockery, and no smile. There was only a man who had finally been told a no that would hold, and who understood, 5 days too late, that the wall he could not command had been the only honest thing between him and his ruin, and that it had held not out of pride, or spite, or an old habit, but because that is what a wall is for. He said nothing. There was nothing left for him to say. Furniture he had called me. But it was the furniture that was still standing at the end, in the king's own house, in full dress, with the king's own head bowed to it. And it was the man who had spent his life sure that every door in the world would open to his word who was walked out through the only door that mattered, held for him, this time, by other men's hands. They did not scrub my name off the duty roster. Captain Marrow entered the week's events in the book of the household in his own dry hand, and where the agent's first note had said obstructive and discourteous, the king's own confirmation, set beside it that evening, said held his post against improper order, and preserved the honor of the crown, and there is no medal in the realm I would trade for that one line in that one book. The Chamberlain, Lord Cassius, lost his white staff before the month was out, quietly, as such things are done, the king at last seeing a little of what his second wife and her son had made of his softness. And the Queen Consort Morwenna sat very still at the far end of that vestibule and said nothing at all. And I will only tell you that she never again suggested a general rearrangement of the household posts, and that the old guard she had called an expensive habit kept its gates. Sir Haveth signed the honest accord the next day, and struck the buried clause, and shook my hand before the court with both of his, and went home to see his crown's justice done to the man who had used his name. And I went back to my gate. That is where I still stand most mornings, under the arch of the sentry gate at the mouth of the east forecourt, the red wool and the bearskin and the white gloves, the last stone throat before the palace proper, holding the king's road that opens for the king and no one else living past the inner court, where the late Queen Isolde's memorial stands in the winter light. On the ground, a foreign man once tried to walk to make himself feel large. No one walks it now who is not meant to. I see to that. It is a small thing, a gate, and a smaller thing, a corporal upon it, and there will always be men who come across the cobblestones certain that the ground has been waiting for the honor of their boots. Let them come. The gate does not open for them, it never did. And the reason it never did is the whole of what I am, and the whole of what the guard is, and it is worth every cold morning I have spent and every one I have left. A crown is only as good as the thing it cannot make you do, and a wall, a true wall, is not the thing that will not move because it is too proud to. It is the thing that will not move because it has given its word. I gave mine, I keep it still.